Bigfoot. I actually have a story about Bigfoot. I'll tell my Bigfoot story. You want to hear my Bigfoot story? Let's tell it. Let's do it. Let's get into it. Here we go. So somebody sent this to me, and it says incredible Hulk turned Bigfoot. It's from the cryptid subreddit, and I'm not a major fan of like cryptid stuff in general. Um, I don't know. It's not something that's really interested me. There are lots of living fossils that I find fascinating. Like today, I was at the zoo. I go to the zoo a lot here in Los Angeles, and I go for a walk. And they have piccaries, which are these pig-like, boar-like animals that are considered living fossils because they had only found them in the fossil record, and they believed them to have been long extinct. And it turns out, no, they were just a very isolated community. And another thing that is similar to that is the story of the coelacanth. So the story of the coelacanth is that there was this lungfish, this fish that had very unusual anatomy. It looked like it may have been um, growing limbs that could kind of waddle around in the mud and the muck, and potentially lead evolutionarily toward a branch of animals that eventually left the sea and became quadrupeds and bipeds and so on and so forth. So coelacanth was way, way, way down on this perceived evolutionary chart. Now, they discovered it. Scientists found it in Africa alive because it was being harvested and sold in a fish market. So, there are at least two living fossils that I am aware of that we believed to have existed in prehistory, and then we rediscovered the animal in more modern times. That doesn't necessarily correlate directly with cryptids. Cryptids are really hand in hand with folklore. Folklore is, in more ways than one, like an oral tradition, and that's continued into the modern era where we talk about cryptids and cryptid sightings, both from things like the famous like footage of Bigfoot walking through the woods on grainy kind of 8 millimeter film, and the doctor's photo of the Loch Ness monster, all the way into what we're seeing now on things like r/cryptids on Reddit, where people tell their stories about different either cryptid experiences, fan art, modern cryptids which have really become prominent in the last like fifth, I don't know, a couple of decades. I was going to say 15 years, but more like 30 or 40 years. My mind is like a little fried today. So, like, that would be things like Mothman, stuff like that. You see a lot of Mothman fan art. Um, so cryptids, I have a strange relationship with them because I'm open to it. I'm open to them being real. Am I open to them being real in the way in which they are presented in the stories of people who are either experiencers or people who believe that they have had some kind of encounter, and that encounter is like super heightened by their their perceived either surprise, danger, however they were assessing the moment. I don't know. I mean, like I was having this conversation with my father the other day. I was going to get some coffee, called him on the phone. While I was driving. We were talking about things that scare you, right? So like, what is scary, and what films were perceived as scary, and Universal monsters and Creature from the Black Lagoon came up, and all this stuff, and they were. I think my father was asking me like, well, what do you consider to be scary? I said, well, it's going to be very different than what you consider to be scary because for me, I spent a good chunk of my childhood in Florida. My father spent all of his childhood in New York City. So some of the things that he has a level of discomfort with, like snakes, for example, is a big one that we talked about. Those kinds of things don't register the same for me because when I was in elementary school and in middle school and stuff, what you would end up hearing is like, "Hey, don't go into the woods. at this place or that place because we saw bears. Don't go swimming in the river because we had this brackish river that was very close to my house. Like literally, like there was my house that I grew up in. After we moved down from New York City, there was my house we grew up in. My grandparents had moved down a couple of years earlier, and they had a house that was sort of like one house closer to the river, and then there was a road, and then there was a river, and we had a dock and a whole thing. And I used to go out there and like play with the dolphins. We had dolphins in the river because the river was brackish. So that meant that it was attached to an inlet, and there were mangroves, and all this kind of stuff was going on where the water from the ocean would mix with the water from the river, and it was sort of this blend of salt and fresh water. That's what brackish means. So we would always be warned, like, hey, don't go swimming in the river because there are bull sharks in the river, and there's a shark nursery at the inlet. So that's where they breed, that's where they have their pups. They're very aggressive. Don't go into the river because there's the potential that since it was also very murky, you could be attacked by a bull shark, especially if you're flailing or have any open wounds, anything like that. So that alligators were a big thing where I grew up. A couple of other strange things. There was a guy who had decided that emu meat was going to be the meat of the future. So what he did was he got a whole bunch of emus and was opening this emu farm where he was going to farm them for meat. What ended up happening with this dude was there was a hurricane that came through, and the emu guy, fences got knocked down, emus ran free because he didn't properly secure them, and for a while there we had an emu problem, right? So there were like emus knocking over trash cans, chasing after people. I remember my wife was down there with me one time, a couple years into our marriage, and she was doing some night gardening at my parents' old house, and she was like, "Oh, what's this big dog that's coming toward me?" And then the dog turned to the side, and she saw what she calls a candy cane, right? Like this candy cane tail. And she freaked out and came running inside. She was breathing really heavy. She's like, candy cane, candy cane, candy cane. I'm like, what? What's going on? She calmly explained it to me. And she doesn't scare easily. Like, she is one of the toughest people that I know. And nothing freaks her out. But she got freaked out because she saw one of these endangered Florida panthers that was coming through in the neighborhood. And I was like, wow, that's incredibly lucky that you got to see this, because very few people get to see a Florida panther like that. So what ended up coming of that is that you grow up in an environment where you are so integrated with nature that animals don't really scare you in the same way that somebody who grew up in a more urban environment may have a discomfort around wildlife, right? So for me, I don't find the stuff about cryptids to be super scary. I don't find it to be necessarily all driven by folklore. Like there's a lot of things that are folk stories and whatever, like Michele Mbembe, in the Congo, and this idea that there may be a living dinosaur that is just deep in the heart of Africa. Giant snakes, things of that nature. There are lots of unexplained things. Obviously, we're still finding large cephalopods like the big fin squid. I believe was only recently discovered, maybe within the past 15, maybe 20 years. And the big fin squid, we only discovered them because we had so many cameras around oil rigs. But that's another thing down in Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of Mexico is one of the only places on Earth where Architeuthis giant squid has been filmed in its natural habitat. So we had giant squid down there too. And I remember seeing a preserved giant squid. I went down one time. I took my car and I drove to what's called the Mote Marine Research Institute. I don't know if they still have it on display, but it was one of the only places on Earth where you could actually go down and see a preserved specimen of a giant squid. So, like, I do believe that there are possibly cryptids that are out there, and I think that people might be mistaking other animals for them. We discover living fossils all the time, but you look at something like Bigfoot, and I think that Bigfoot has kind of crossed over from the realm of potential real animal into being much more deeply embedded in folklore and pop culture than some of these other creatures may be. And this, I think, is very indicative of that because you're looking at like, oh, the Incredible Hulk, you know, looks like, turned into with this teddy bear that they've merged together into this Bigfoot kind of hybrid toy. It's funny to me because you look at the Incredible Hulk in that 1970s era when it was Lou Ferrigno on TV with the Bill Bixby version of the Incredible Hulk, and at the same time you had the $6 Million Man on TV, which was this TV show about like this guy who was cybernetically enhanced. And one of the major episodes they had, one of the ones that's always referenced from that, is the $6 Million Man versus Bigfoot. So Bigfoot and the Incredible Hulk were actually concurrently in the zeitgeist on network television here in the United States. They are things that are somewhat interchangeable in terms of like hulking kind of monster. So do I think that that incentivizes people to tell stories about Bigfoot more than other cryptids? Something about it being like just part of North American Canadian culture. Yeah, maybe. Um, I think there's definitely more of a cult of personality that's built up around it, a kind of camp. But this is where it gets into my actual Bigfoot story. I was in Vermont, and we were at this bookstore, I want to call it, in Manchester, Vermont. I say that I kind of want to call it a bookstore because it's sort of like the main hub in that town where there's like events that happen there. They sell books, they sell videos, they sell video games. It's sort of like a town center place. They have concerts that go on there, like little acoustic ones. Interesting people actually come through and play the Manchester, Vermont bookstore. It's a really cool place. It sort of feels a little bit like a library. So I'm in there and I was getting ready to buy something, and there was a dude in front of me. And this is the dude who was like a hard looking guy, shaved head, had some kind of tats on the back or whatever. But he stood out to me because he was wearing a ranger outfit. Um, Up in Vermont, there's like a whole bunch of like fire watch stations. There's a whole lot of ranger activity. The mountains and hills up there. There's a lot of skiing up on Stratton Mountain. So you end up having a lot of people that are part of the Forest Service and whatever else. And this guy's wearing a ranger outfit, and he was ahead of me in line to check out, and he was yelling at the clerk. He was up there going like, "No, I'm not looking for something for children. I am looking for something on Bigfoot and how to trap it, spot it, whatever it is, real information." And he's like yelling at this old lady, this tiny old lady that's working at the counter, and she's kind of freaked out. Like, is this guy for real? He was having like an anxiety thing, yelling at this woman because she had directed him to books about Bigfoot, and most of them were either for like young adults or sensationalist in some way. There was no scientific literature that he could get about Bigfoot. And the way that his body language was dominating her, the energy that he was bringing to the party, a lot of that whole vibe was that he was serious, he was scared, and he finally gets like right over her and he goes, "There is something out there. And every time that I'm in that tower, I hear it, I see it in the shadows, I feel like it's stalking me, and I feel like it's Bigfoot. And I want to know what it is. I want to know more about it. I need closure on this. I need to know what I'm seeing." And he was so earnest in the way that he was talking to her. And there wasn't like, this is in an era before people were like filming pranks and stuff for YouTube. I don't even know if YouTube existed, but like it wasn't what it is now. And there wasn't really any like videoing on cell phones and stuff like that. So this was a different era. And he wasn't doing this for an audience. He wasn't doing this as a prank. He was just a guy who was legitimately believing in Bigfoot, earnestly trying to look for information. And that earnestness coming from somebody who was like a forest ranger started making me question. I'm still not sold on there being like a cryptid like Bigfoot, but it made me question whether there is a little bit more to something like a cryptid like Bigfoot, at least in the sense that people believe it in a way that they don't just believe mythology or folklore or something that exists in the zeitgeist of pop culture. There are people out there that believe it as a very true and valid experience, and that opens my mind to the possibility that people are experiencing, all kinds of encounters with cryptids, and maybe there should be deeper investigation into more of these claims instead of dismissing them out of hand. So that's my Bigfoot story. Make sure to follow, like, subscribe. Thanks for the comment. Thanks for sending me this link on Reddit, and I will see you out there.